Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. It's so amazing to see you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Hello. Thank you for spending an hour of your day with us. My name is Liz Loeb. I use she and her pronouns. I'm here on Dakota land in my home in Northeast Minneapolis, and I'm the Associate Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We are going to jump right in and start because we only have an hour together, and time, as we'll talk about today, is a construct and a cultural interpretation. It's also a way that we agree to orient ourselves together. So I'm going to use one version of time to help guide us through our togetherness. I want to let you know that we're recording this session. The purpose of the recording is so that we can share with folks who aren't able to be here. And so the recording will be available kind of through MNIPL. And if at any point we're having a discussion where some people really need us to not be recording in order to participate, let us know and we'll navigate that together. And we'll just figure out how to hold that with each other and with consent. I really am just so delighted to see everyone. This is pretty amazing. As we warm up, settle in, I know folks are still coming in, do what you need to do, get up, get a snack, use the restroom, do all the things. But I invite folks, if you feel so moved, to start putting in the chat just a little hello, a little bit about yourself, maybe what brought you here today. Just feel free to start introducing yourselves in the chat. It's amazing to start to get a sense of who's here. We will start by introducing ourselves a little. A lot of you know us, many of you know us, me and just us. Who is this us of which I speak? I'm holding this space today and facilitating this space with my incredible, amazing friend and colleague, Jessica Intermill. And many of you had the opportunity to hear our introductions last week, but for folks who are new, I wanted to take a minute and introduce ourselves. And so actually, Jessica, why don't I pass to you? And then I'll come back and say a little bit more about me because I already got to tell people, hello, I'm Liz. Haha. I'm feeling punchy today, folks. It's all good.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jessica. Haha. I am also coming to you from Dakota land and use she, her pronouns. I am an Indian law attorney. I represent tribes in governance and treaty rights litigation, which means that I help tribes write their own laws, and I work with the United States to try to make it hold up its end of the bargains that it has struck. I'm going to keep looking off to my right because I'm letting people into the waiting room as I'm talking. But in my legal work, I have learned that there are limits to what the law can do and to what courts can do. And so that's when I started doing some reparations work, and am really, really excited to speak with you all today about the change that we can make together. At the same time, I'm coming to you from my house where my child has COVID, and we replaced a pipe today, and there's a lot of things going on. So I also just want to acknowledge that we have lives that are going on outside that door and that door. So Liz, I will send it back to you.
Yes. Speaking of actual lives, I'm trying to arrange getting my car towed. Long story, everything's fine, but everything fine doesn't involve my car starting before the parking restrictions go into effect on Dakota land in Minneapolis tonight. And so if I get a phone call from the tow truck, I will leave for 3 minutes mid-sentence, and Jessica will be well prepared to hop in if I happen to be talking when that happens. So just so you all know. Like Jessica, I am also an attorney by training. I was a civil rights attorney with the National ACLU litigating racial justice cases and international human rights cases. I spent time in academia, but my career and my life has been immersed in social movements and in social movement organizations for really similar reasons to what Jessica shared about the limits of law as a tool. It's been the honor and the privilege of my life to do this work with so many of you. And when we talk about reparations as a specific form of practice and action, I draw so deeply on my own Jewish tradition around what it means to take on repairing the world, what it means to be in repair and healing in a world that.
Hi, Sam.
Oh, hello. No, I totally appreciate folks jumping in. I did not grow up in Minnesota. I grew up on the East Coast. And so to me, interrupting is a sign of respect and engagement, which I know is very different and might be true for some folks here, but I very much welcome interruptions and will do my best not to interrupt all of you, because that's how navigating cultural differences work. But I was just trying to say, not only from the tradition I hold as a Jew, but just from the life that I long for myself and for the people I love, I know I don't get to experience relationships of liberation if we don't go through the work of healing and repair. And I know that's something we don't get to finish. We get to be in it together. And that is both hard and glorious. And so reparations feels incredibly personal to me, because it's about the relationships that I get to have with the people I care about most, with the earth and what holds us. And it's about, I have a 7-month-old, and it's about the world that she I don't even have the words, right? If anybody has a child in their life, however you do, that feeling of, it's not just that I want this for her, it's that I want her to know what it means to be in full relationship. And that can't happen without this. And I can't do that alone. Like, we need each other so deeply and so completely to make that possible. So incredible gratitude to each of you for being here. And with that, I will turn it back to Jessica to give us a roadmap of what's happening today.
All right, everyone, I just want to give you a brief overview so that you know what direction we're going today. We're going to briefly revisit content from our last session, and then go on to talk about why now and then why MNIPL. We're going to have intentional conversation, a little less just us talking at you this session than we did last time. So if you have questions throughout from time to time, feel free to pop up. We will also have times built in to ask you when you have questions, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, and with me still managing the waiting room and letting people in as I can, I'm going to just jump into the recap. We talked last time about what are reparations. And for that, we had sort of this, this duality of both what reparations are and what reparations are not. And the place we really landed on what reparations are, and I'm going to screen share here, is this, what we're calling the repertory eco map. Now, this eco map is the 5-circle diagram. The overlapping circles are truth-telling, spiritual practice, relationship, political solidarity, and wealth return. We talked about how these are sort of a necessary and sufficient. All 5 are necessary, none alone are sufficient. And reparations is at the middle of this. It's what happens when we're intentional about all 5 areas, and talked a little bit about those areas. We do have the recording from that session for folks who are not able to attend. But we also want to follow up just a little bit, because we talked about how we frame things in white supremacy culture. And one of the sort of hallmarks of white supremacy culture is what we call binaries, either or, this or that. And we fell right into that trap when we talked about reparations are this and they are not that. And we had a fantastic question come from our audience over email about, okay, but, because we had said that reparations are not apology. And the question that came was, but what if I am in, and this person is in some reparations work at a city level, what if I'm on this reparations task force and the Black man next to me says that what we need is an apology? Isn't that reparations? Yes, it is. Because when we put what reparations are at one end and what they're not at the other. The part that lies in between is that we need to be listening to what affected communities and people need. And so when that apology is not what I am offering to make me feel better, but is instead what the other person needs to begin repair, then it absolutely is part of reparations. And so all of the things we told you about this last session come with that giant asterisk that throughout all of this, it's about listening and it's about learning and understanding that even though this one person might really need an apology, other people might not, and they might be like, okay, we get to the money, right? And so all of that is something that we want to hold and not be a this or that so much as hold all of it. Any questions there before I go on? All right, I don't think we have anyone in the waiting room. Okay, so if you do have questions or observations that have popped up since last time, feel free to email us offline, but also feel free to pop up in the chat and or come off mute. So why now, right? Because the harms happened then. Why do we care now? And there are some very Jewish responses to that question, which I'm kind of curious, like folks who identify as Jewish who are in the room, if you could put into the chat, what are your instant reactions to that question? Why now?
Specifically, the why now is why reparations.
Why reparations now? Yes. Good point. If not now, when?
Nova, yes.
Yes. And watch the, I mean, my guess is that every Jew in the room had this same thing pop into their head. If not now, when? And this is it's a rabbinic teaching that frames how I look at this question as well. Because the if not now, when really talks about how time is not really on a linear continuum, but it is sort of always. And I want to share with you, I'm going to screen share again, because this is not just a Jewish teaching. This is an idea that comes up in a lot of different fields in a lot of different ways. But it's not the way that we're taught about time or about history. So for example, I was taught that time is linear. Events occur only at one point in time. And then maybe there's some cause, maybe there's some effect, but we flip the page, we go to the next chapter. Now is fundamentally separate from then. And there's not a lot of connection between them. They're sort of isolated events. That was my, grade school history experience. But the thing is, and you can see here, this is sort of how I conceive of that, like in my grade school teaching. Well, first of all, things start with the American Revolution, which is an interesting place to start. And then we talk about the next chapter of slavery. And then we talk about westward expansion and then the Civil War, which of course, if we think about it, is not how time goes. Because slavery happened, it was well established before the American Revolution. It was part of westward expansion. So for example, Dred and Harriet Scott, who were the plaintiffs who went to the Supreme Court asking to be called human, be called not chattel. They were slaves at Fort Snelling here in Minneapolis. And they were slaves during westward expansion. They were actually slaves at the fort that was the Indian Agency. And that's what the United States called the federal outpost that would deal with tribes during westward expansion. So obviously this, this very facile, this, then that, then the other thing, all separate, is not really true. And it's not just because the effects persist today, which is true. It is also because all of those things are true at once. And so the way that I think about this is that instead of that sort of, separate beads of history, What if instead we flip the timeline? And we talked about this a little bit last time, but I wanted you to see this image because when you stack the layer cake, you can think about how we stand in all of these places at once. When I sit here and speak to you in Minneapolis, I am in the same Minneapolis that murdered George Floyd a couple of years ago, in the same Minneapolis that was the location of Dred and Harriet Scott's enslavement back a century ago, in the same place that is and was Dakota land. All of those things are happening right now. And when you think about time this way and think about how all of that past is happening now, the other thing that is kind of amazing about it is that we're also standing in tomorrow. We are standing today in the future that we will make together. So the same way that the decisions that my ancestors made hundreds and several hundreds of years ago created the world that I live in, what we choose today and how we do the work together and how we affect repair creates the world that we'll be in tomorrow. And I want to give you a real concrete example of that from Minnesota. So the Stone Arch Bridge is an iconic Minnesota feature. Minnesota Makoche is and always has been a Dakota place, especially here in the Twin Cities. And so the land that the Stone Arch Bridge is on was barely outside of an 1805 Dakota treaty, but is in on an 1851 treaty that those treaty rights continue today. Because if they did not, we would not be here. I would not, Liz would not, so many of us who are coming from the Twin Cities would not. We have treaty rights that persist today. But at the same time that this treaty exists, there are other features of the landscape also that affect and are relevant to the Stone Arch Bridge. The Stone Arch Bridge is right at what we call St. Anthony Falls, and that was this a waterfall that powered the flour and lumber mills of Minneapolis. Minneapolis is sometimes called the Mill City because that's the industry that really generated wealth in this area, and that wealth led to settlement. One of the most prominent mills is the Washburn A Mill. It is like steps from Liz and my neighborhood. And it is actually the site of a Minnesota Historical Society museum. The Mill City Museum is built in the ruins of that building. So all of that still exists today. And when you stand on the Stone Arch Bridge and look at it, you can see the Dakota dispossession pretty obviously, right? You're standing on Dakota land. But you can also see Ojibwe dispossession, because we don't just stand in the 1851 treaty time, we also stand in an 1855 treaty that ceded land far upriver. So we're going up the Mississippi River to the headwaters. And that was Ojibwe land that was ceded in 1855. Now that matters because the industrialists of the time, as Minneapolis was generating its wealth and it was the Mill City, they said, you know, this water, this river is really variable. Like sometimes it floods, sometimes it's, you know, going down to a trickle. That's really not good for our companies, our factories that need a constant flow of water to really make this the most productive use of the river. So William D. Washburn, which is to say Senator Washburn of the Washburn A. Mill family, went to Washington and he said, you know what we need? We need a dam. We need a federally funded dam that will control the river flow. And he got his money. So the federal government agreed to construct this dam near the headwaters. 1880 construction began, and immediately the Leech Lake bands of Ojibwe were objecting to construction because it was decimating their homeland. The US did it anyway. It flooded 45,000 acres of Leech Lake territory. Critical habitat, homes, grave sites. Today, there's a town named Federal Dam that's right outside of where this happened. And today, Minnesota's first and only Supreme Court justice who is Indigenous, her hometown is Federal Dam. So when you go to Minneapolis and you stand on the Stone Arch Bridge, all of these things are happening at once, not just in a time way, but also in a location way, because these ripples go in so many different directions. It is just not the if this, then that linear progression of time that we're taught. Instead, it is a complex web of interaction that all exists everywhere. So when Liz and I sit back and ask, why now? Why reparations now? If not now, when is absolutely the very first phrase that comes to my mind. But it's also to remind myself that now is always. Now is all of that time that came before, and it's all of the time that will come. And so that's sort of the framework that I would invite you all to consider as we continue this work. But before we go on, I would love to hear back from you. How does that sit with you? What does that raise for you? What questions, or what, oh my gosh, yes, or but wait, about what? What pops up?
And I'll add, as people are considering, we have some time for discussion, so no rush, but how to respond, what to raise with the group. It also might be helpful to think about, if you come from a tradition, if you come from a community of spiritual practice, what have you learned through your traditions and practices around time and how we come to the work of repair?
This is Kate O'Connell. I just want to say that was the most powerful presentation that I've seen about that time. It's kind of like if you were an old tree and you witnessed all of it, it would still be in your lifetime. And that I just really appreciate your sending that.
Thank you so much, Kate. I got shivers when you talked about, being the tree that is part of all of it.
I have a question. I see that part of the state surplus is going to be spent on the Stone Arch Bridge. My question is there currently any kind of plaque or anything that recognizes some of this history currently on the bridge? And could we lobby, if there's not, could we lobby to have, as they're making improvements to the Stone Arch Bridge, that they consider having some kind of historical plaque that acknowledges this history? And I don't know if there's currently one or not. I'm curious.
That is a great question, Judy. I'm like rewinding in my brain the times that I've crossed the Stone Arch Bridge, and I don't think that there is one. There's certainly not talking about Ojibwe dispossession or Anishinaabe dispossession upriver. Liz?
I just walked the bridge this past weekend, and there might be a mention of it being Dakota, but there is no real storytelling, and there's no real acknowledgement that I saw in the physical, like in any physical way or in any written way.
There also happens to be a pioneers monument very near to this bridge that has had a lot of discussion about whether it should have some additional interpretation around it. And so I think that's a great question. And also, these are stories we can tell each other and our friends and our neighbors. And so you know, whether the legislature does it or not, whether the courts do it or not, one of the really exciting things is to continue that ourselves. I think Michael has his hand up.
In our community, we have a bridge being repaired, etc. And the local tribal folks are creating their artwork that's going to be included into the bridge repair, as opposed to us white folks creating a plaque. The indigenous folks in placekeeping are creating art to be incorporated into the bridge.
Thank you, Michael. That is super important to hear from affected communities and to include them in the interpretation. I think that Tova was next.
Jessica, I just want to say thank you again for that really powerful storytelling and truth telling. And the whole time you were saying that, I was thinking about how we now understand history to be carried in our bodies, in the sense of our ancestors, their trauma, also joy, culture, also physically, you know, we're affected by things that are on the land that we've lived on, and we pass it down to our children. So we are not really acting just as ourselves, we're acting as our lineage and as our history. So, I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm not just here for myself. I'm here for, you know, my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who had to flee their land. Just thank you. If not now, when?
Thank you, Tova. I appreciate that. I think Crystal, you're up next. Oh, but you're muted.
There we go. One of the things that occurred to me when you were talking, and then you actually kind of reiterated the point, was that these are stories that we can start telling our children. And it's, you know, timing, the universe always has a way of timing. So I think it was the African-American, the new museum that's on like Penn and what is it, Penn and Plymouth. They did a series or a book. They did like a project on the lynchings in Duluth. And my 6th grader started looking at it and then got out her tablet and was like, I want to learn more about this, because my dad took us to Duluth. My dad's Black, my mom was white. My dad took us to Duluth though this summer so that we could spread my mom's ashes, and they really loved Duluth. And you know, and I was trying to kind of give them some context, and you know, but we were on vacation. And so she says to me, oh, I don't know if I want to go back there now. Is that why people were looking at us funny when we were there? And so it occurs to me in our sharing our stories that these are stories that should be being taught Minnesota history in our schools. You know, if we are, and I grew up in the ELCA Lutheran Church, you know, went to the conferences and did all the things. And I was just telling my 15-year-old about my confirmation. And so, you know, faith without works. And so I think it's in the doing and the retelling, like telling accurate history and things like that. That's, for me, at least, that's part of reparations too, is telling the truth. So.
Thank you, Crystal. I so appreciate that. If we flip back to the 5-circle model, the reason we actually didn't start with truth telling at the top, it started with just a kind of a random order. And as we've used it more, we shifted truth telling to be at the top because it can be such a powerful entry point for folks. And an accessible one, right? Like not everybody's going to have a Black friend, especially if you're, you know, live in Morton, Minnesota. But you can go read a book and you can pick up these histories, because I mean, one of the things that gets me is that we'll talk about Native American history and Black history. And the thing is, it's American history, right? Like white folks were there for all of it. And it is all of our history, whether we tell those stories or not. And so let's tell them and let's get to it. I think we're going to pivot.
Could I don't have a hand on my computer. I had it up, so could I say
Come on.
something?
Yes, Jeremiah.
Okay, all right, yeah, just to give a Christian context, is that since like 325, when the church got connected with the empire, or temporal power, because of Constantine, it was illegal not to be a Christian, and been intertwined with that. And then, of course, the doctrine of discovery, which is really important. And Mark Charles has a wonderful webinar on that, or recording like that, is that white, as I kind of wrote a little bit of a song, the white settlers brought their papal bull to justify that that natives and blacks were inhuman, you know. So I think that context is important. And even I heard in a recent webinar, there's one Catholic diocese that are thinking about working with Native American relationship, which is great. But part of the context is one person resigned from that diocese because they would not talk about the doctrine of discovery, you know, because that's all hooked together, Mark Charles, with the Constitution, which the Constitution says that, you know, that non-white people aren't, or even women aren't real full, I don't know about humans, but not voting people for sure.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us back to that doctrine of discovery, Jeremiah. We included some materials with that last time, and if you haven't had a chance, I do encourage you to go back and look at that.
Yeah.
That is, and not you specifically, I mean like everybody. But it's not just this historical artifact. This is another time exists all the time. There is a United States Supreme Court case from 1850 or 60 something that adopted the doctrine of discovery as US law. And it has never been changed. And every single property right in the United States that is not an indigenous right is based on that US law adopting this doctrine of discovery that was essentially saying, if it's not, all of the things and all of the people belong to the Christians, and initially specifically the Catholics, but that expanded to the Christians too. And so that root is still alive and well in our lives today. And also, we're going to shift a little bit to talk about, and we talked about why now, but we also want to talk about why MNIPL, and maybe a little bit more generally, why is this part of the climate movement? So I'll send it over to Liz.
Friends, I'm so excited to talk about this with you. And this is intertwined with the discussion we just had and with all of the beautiful realizing that Jessica invited us into. But at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, we believe that we cannot do the work of climate justice without doing work around reparations. And we believe that climate justice and reparations are intertwined and necessary to one another. And I wanted to tell you why. I mean, when we thought about designing this session, we thought about doing like breakout groups and this whole collaborative thing. And I realized that MNIPL has, well, we have an opinion on this. And I thought I should share that with you. And then we can have a discussion about how to, some of you came to this discussion through incredible work in activism and movement building around climate justice. And some of you came to it through other ways, which is so necessary and good. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about our analysis at MNIPL, an analysis we share with many of our movement partners. And then I'll invite us into a discussion where we can all kind of explore and reflect for ourselves about what our responses are. So this is certainly not about having a right answer. It's not even about having an answer, but I wanted to share some of our perspective and where we've come to with you. How does that sound? I see nods. I love when I see nods. Okay, so I'm going to talk for a little bit, which means I'm going to pull up my notes. Ha ha. This is just a day of ha-has. So I want to actually start by telling a story from the early 2000s when I was an attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. I was part of our practice around international human rights, and the International Human Rights Program at the Center for Constitutional Rights, we were suing oil companies. We were spending so many hours a day suing oil companies for such good reasons. We were suing the Royal Dutch Petroleum Shell Oil Company. We were suing Chevron. We were suing all of them. And one thing I learned through this process is that almost every oil company is a global conglomerate that was formed for the express purpose of colonial land capture, like the East India Trading Company. They were commercial vehicles for colonization that were protected by a system of international law, and specifically maritime law, because you had to sail ships to go to the places to take the land, which then became the places where you took the oil. And so I want to talk about our case against the Shell Oil Company, the Royal Dutch Petroleum Shell Oil Company. Shell Oil had spent decades in Nigeria committing atrocities against the indigenous Ogoni peoples and the Niger River Delta. So against the people and the land. I see you in the chat. Oy, yes. And so the Ogoni people are Black indigenous people who have been deeply impacted by the Atlantic slave trade, and who were now having their homes and their land and their lives and their livelihood destroyed intentionally by an international colonialist oil company. And again, this is still ongoing, but this case came to a head in the early 2000s. So remembering all of the things we just absorbed about how time is working through us, right? And it was clear that what Shell Oil was doing in Nigeria was not only the attempted genocide against the native people, it really was. Shell Oil had documents saying we are going to get rid of the Ogoni people, not just by dispossessing them, but in fact ending their collective being as a people, because I got to see the documents. And it was completely clear that the drilling and extraction of oil was hastening climate change, was creating ecological devastation of a crucial ecosystem. So it's clearly a climate issue, and it's clearly a human rights and indigenous issue. So we brought a case under various provisions of international law, and we won. We won hundreds of millions in monetary damages, because that's what the courts could provide. We were able to litigate the cases under US jurisdiction, insert a lot of law here. We won all of the things. And the Shell Oil Company said, great, put it on our tab. We can pay that bill. We make more money selling oil than you could ever charge us in the courts. Our accountants will take care of it, which is a reason I'm not a lawyer anymore, one of the reasons. And so their actions continued. And it was because international law didn't recognize native title to land or the sovereignty of the Ogoni people. So we didn't have a way to stop them from engaging in oil extraction. And so this is because even in international law, the legal concept of land ownership and our obligations to the land is rooted specifically in the colonial structures of British law, which then became US law around ownership and property. And it was fascinating because I interviewed many of the decision makers in the Shell Oil Company, granted under duress, but still, I mean, duress in the sense that they were legally obligated to talk to me. They definitely didn't want to. And they justified their actions towards the Ogoni and towards the land and towards their investment in fossil fuels in the same way every time. They said, we have the legal right to do this. We have a right and an obligation to our shareholders to make a profit. We're in fact acting ethically and morally because our obligation is to our shareholders to make money. And this is progress that benefits everyone. They absolutely tried to make a public good argument that we all benefit from what's happening, which means we are all culpable and all complicit and involved in what we do about it. And so I want to lift up two things about this storytelling from my experience. One is a worldview. When we engage in reparations, I believe when I engage in reparations, I am trying to undo in myself the worldview that resources are something to be used for progress and profit, that is possible because we are separate from the earth and each other. It is only possible to believe that if you do not believe that the earth is your mother or your parent or your relative. And that worldview enables climate destruction, that understanding of separateness, right? And it's the same worldview that believes we can extract from the land without relationship is the worldview that believes land can be owned and taken, that it can be taken from Native people, and that Black people should and can be enslaved as sources of labor, right? The mindset of enslavement and land theft is the same as you get. I could keep saying it over and over again, but like riff, rush, shmush, and just like shmush. And so there's a theory of change for MNIPL, which is that if we are able to shift our relationship to land and ownership, we can change how we have been colonized by that worldview, then we can, when we shift that worldview, we make it possible to win concrete change around climate justice. It's so many words to say this thing, right? You can almost feel me stumbling over it. But there's a second part to that. We can't win on climate without shifting our worldview around ownership. And we can't make that shift, and here's the key part. We can't make that shift without engaging in healing and repair. And reparations is a way to engage in healing and repair. So if this were if I were explaining this to somebody who believed in a logic model and they were like, get me from A to B, and that is not, it's all in a circle, right? That's how I try to explain it, is in those steps. And so here are the 3 reasons that MNIPL said, yes, reparations has to be a core part of how we come to this work. Number 1, it is the right thing to do for all of us to have the opportunity to experience any bit of liberation or relationship in our lifetime. And because it invests in the healing of people who are owed repair, and it asks all of us to reflect on our responsibility to act towards repair. So we said yes because it's the right thing to do. 2, we said yes because we are a multiracial organization. We cannot win on climate justice without taking action towards racial justice. And the systems of racism and the systems of climate destruction are intertwined. We also cannot remain in trust and credibility with our own people, our base, our partners, our leaders, if we are not acting towards the healing of the wounds of this land, which in the geography called the United States are the wounds of stolen Native land, the genocide and attempted genocide of Native people, and the enslavement of Black and African people. And then a lot of other stuff too. There's other stuff to add, mind you. And then number 3, the 3rd reason is that the work of coming into reparations shifts our worldview in ways that attune us more effectively to the work of climate justice. Even in the climate justice movement, we often say, oh, the earth is our most precious resource, and that's why we should do things about climate change, right? Think of the worldview in that. Whereas we have the opportunity to say the earth is our relative and we need to treat her like our relative. The same forces that treat the earth like it is an extractable resource treat bodies and land as something that can be taken and controlled. And when we interrupt that tangle, we make transformation possible. We really do. So all of that's a little dense. You could even feel me in it trying to pull the threads, right? It's a shmush. But I believe when we build our analysis in ways that harden our understanding of why and how the climate justice movement can come to the work of reparations as a way towards repair, as one way towards repair. I believe when we do that, and this is the last thing I'll say before I open it up to everybody, when we do that, we create the collective conditions for transformations in which we win. And when I don't like the word win, right? Because I could deconstruct the word win, but in which we make the lives we dream of possible together. How about that? So with that, I will pause. We have 15 minutes left in our time, and I see so many good things happening in the chat. I would love to open this to conversation, reflection, offerings. We can really just be together in this last quarter of our of this particular moment in this Zoom room. Jeremiah, I'm going to pause because you spoke when we transitioned last time. I'd love to hear from you again, but I want to actually see if somebody who hasn't participated yet has something to offer.
Liz, I want to lift up a note from Matt in the chat that reframing even the earth as our relative to
Yes.
the earth's relative is
Yes.
I feel really strongly about this. We are not relatives. We are the same. The earth is us, and we are the earth. So it would just be great not to even have the separation of relationship, but just the unanimity of all life. So couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, thank goodness you didn't resist. Do I pronounce your name Sienna? Is that how I say your name?
Yeah, Sienna.
Sienna. So this is, I'm feeling so much in what you say of what it is to be, our biological life cannot be separated from the constellation of stardust and possibility that we call the earth. Even trying to call it something in English, right, is to make it an object outside of us, which it is not. I also know there are many traditions and many Native and indigenous traditions that use the language of relative for a specific purpose. And I think there's so much, this is why we talk about what are our authentic traditions and practices, right? How do we come to it? Because I think there needs to be so much room for a number of different ways of talking about it as we consider how are we doing the work of decolonization within us. So I really thank you for that.
Sorry, one more. My impression of those indigenous usages is to see that everything on the earth is our relative.
Yes. Yes.
That all my relations are all the living things around us. But I really feel it, like when we talk about the earth as ours or anything about climate change, as if it only was an inconvenience to us or might make things harder, but it's like, no, this is like life and death. That we need to like just not see the earth as separate from us, or not see ourselves as separate from the earth.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just pursuing that a little bit hard. I really feel it deeply I really feel it deeply.
No apology needed. I thank you. I really thank you for that. Other thoughts, reactions, questions? I see Susan Mullen.
I just wanted to say thank you for articulating so clearly. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I just wanted to thank you for articulating clearly why we do this. And that's going to be very helpful for me as I work with my congregation on these kinds of issues. So I just wanted to lift that up, that I haven't heard it articulated that clearly before. So I thank you.
I'm so glad to hear it might be useful. That makes me delighted. Shamuel, am I saying your name correctly? Please correct me.
Yep, it works great. So I want to thank both of you for your passion, because you needed it as we worked through this. And so thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you for being here. My goodness. Thank you. Jeremiah, I'm going to come back to you because I know you were going to jump in. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, back to one question about the relative thing, metaphysically, basically there's energy and matter, and it changes just like water, ice, so technically we are one, it just changes forms. But my confusion and question, and you being a lawyer, maybe you can answer this, I don't understand, and it's fundamental to me, is my understanding is that native, federally recognized tribes at least are supposed to be sovereign. I know my face is moving around. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I have a 2007 computer. Using that, but until that gets settled, that they're really sovereign nations, we just don't tell Germany what to do or Israel or anybody else. So I don't understand that lockage.
Jessica Intermill. I will offer this one to you.
So welcome to federal Indian law. While we call them sovereign nations, what the Supreme Court calls them is domestic dependent nations. And this is also, it comes from the doctrine of discovery, basically says, well, we conquered y'all. You were sovereign, right? You were pre-constitutional sovereigns. You were sovereign before we were, because you were here and governing yourselves before the American Revolution. But we conquered you, so, and you're not Christian anyway. So you are now, you're sovereigns that are within our borders. And so the law around that, in broad strokes, is that the federal government can do whatever it wants to tribes, like anything, including there's a Supreme Court case that says you can cancel treaties if you want to. You have that power. You can do it unilaterally. And in Minnesota, they did. Congress did. It said no more treaties with the Dakota, which is why Anishinaabe up north have hunting and fishing rights, but south, the Dakota, do not, because there was an actual act of Congress that expelled them from Minnesota and took away the treaties. And the Supreme Court says that's okay. And they're probably, especially now, not going to change their minds. And so these are some of the restrictions that we deal with inside of the courts. And here we don't have those restrictions. We get to decolonize our brains how we want to. So, in a nutshell, federal Indian law, Congress can do it at once.
Thank you so much. Depressing, but at
Yeah.
least I know the truth.
There's something I want to add that was occurring. There's something I want to add that isn't about federal Indian law, though it also is. And I realized it was throwing me off when I was talking about why do we do this work. I could feel it kind of pulling me out of clarity. And I felt it again when Jessica was talking, which is in order to tell ourselves some of the truths of the stories here, we have to repeat harm and violence that has occurred and is occurring to real people, some of whom are on this Zoom. I mean, there are Black and Native people on this Zoom. There are non-Christian folks on the Zoom, but that's a different kind of being and a different kind of impact. And there's something that happens for me when we keep repeating the words that tugs away from these are people's real and actual lives right now. And it's the people who experienced it who get to tell the stories of pain and violence and oppression, but also of brilliance and creativity and love and connection. And so there's a thing that language does. And I know we have to go through that in order to communicate, to do the storytelling together. But I just wanted to take a moment and notice that is also in the room with us, that every time we repeat this, the types of violence that are occurring, we are talking about the lives and stories of our friend, I am talking about the lives and stories of my friends and my comrades who are alive and present with all of this and with the complexity of it.
I invite everyone to take a breath with me because I can feel myself go. So as we gather up the threads of thoughts from all that these last 55 minutes have been, know that we will be collecting the chat and sending out the highlights again as we did last time, with the video and with a to-go tool, because we get lunch to go. We had leftovers earlier. I forgot to say that, but that's what we were calling the recap. So we will have tools for you to think about how to introduce the reparations concepts and movement and need into your climate circles, and also some prompts to think about how history lives in you today and how the future lives in you today. We'll send all of that out after, probably in a day or two after the call. But before we depart today, I do want to offer our deep, deep gratitude to all of you for joining us. We have, how many? 85 people on the call today. We had like 97 2 weeks ago. We have 180 that are signed up for the whole thing, and it's coast to coast. We have Oregon to Massachusetts, y'all. And I offer that so that, and this is without advertising. Like, we put it in the newsletter, and the rest of y'all just did word of mouth. That's exciting because we're in this together. We have a network. We are in relationship and can keep this movement going outside of this 1 hour that we're together. I am going to pause there and do a bit of a shift. We know that it's weird in a reparations space to do a monetary ask for MNIPL. But I first want to acknowledge our extreme thanks for those of you who were able to and did contribute after our last session. We have a couple new sustaining donors. We really, really appreciate that. That helps us build the change that we need to see in the world. We would invite all of you, if you are able and you feel moved and it feels right for you, to help us support this work. Really, any way that you can support this work is welcome. If that's a donation for you, we would love to send you to the link www.mnipl.org/donate. I don't know it as well as Liz does. But we invite you to contribute, and whether that contribution is monetary, whether that is taking this to your study group, whether that is telling your spouse over dinner tonight, so this thing happened and my brain is broke open because of time. However you are able to contribute, please do. We really appreciate that. That's what helps us bring this work to more folks, because we want to do it at no charge, so that it's accessible, so that it can be shared, and so that we can make the movement work, right? And be this change. Is there anything else that anyone would like to share? Liz?
I'm typing in the chat.
You're typing in the chat. While Liz types, I would invite others to type in the chat any closing thoughts that they have, any parting things you want us to be thinking about, or things that are bubbling up for you. And should we play some departure music? Play us out, Liz.
Yeah, I'll play music for a few minutes as we kind of use the chat and seal our time together. Last week we did one thing we learned, one thing we're grateful for. I just can't thank you all enough for being here. We will send an email. It will have all of the things, but mostly I just can't wait to be together with you again. And I'm so glad to be in a world that has all of you in it, where we're doing this. So I'll stop trying to make words. I'm just so grateful. I'll play some music. Oh, come back, little music player. Here we go. This is by Napo and Benedict.
I'll be the earth to ground you from the chaos all around. I'll be the home you return to. Yeah. I can be your middle ground, and I will serve as a reminder If you jump, you will not fall. Go on and spread those wings of reason. We are water after all. And if you call on me, I'll come running like a coyote. 'Cause we're pillars indeed. A lighthouse when you're out to sea. A beacon when direction's all I need. A compass if you know what I mean. Drunk on that nectar of all that you are to me. And you can trust me and my instincts, 'cause they are like that of a bird. I am loyal, I will feed you, sing your songs you never heard. Who wants to wear the hat this morning? I reckon neither of us cares. 'Cause there is more to life than leading, yeah. And I would follow you, I swear. And if you call on me, I'll come running like a coyote. 'Cause we're pillars indeed. A lighthouse when you're out to sea. A beacon when direction's all I need. A compass if you know what I mean. Drunk on that nectar of all that you are to me. I will always share my fire. Proper way to pay respects. Lay tobacco down and gratitude, yeah. One thing I cannot neglect. And there are eyes that watch us closely. And there's a story they will tell. There's a war between fact and fiction, yeah. We have no time to dispel. So familiar yet so foreign. Polaroids say so much. Bring me ceremony, parallels. I'll bring vetiver and sagebrush. And if you call on me, I'll come running like a coyote. 'Cause we're pillars indeed. A lighthouse when you're out to sea. A beacon when direction's all I need. A compass if you know what I mean. Drunk on that nectar of all that you are to me. And I love your feet for how they found me, and how they walked upon four winds. Be my deer, I'll be your meadow. Come graze upon bare skin.